Chinese migrants are rushing to find a way to the U.S. southern border before the, quote, doors close. That's according to a new report in the Wall Street Journal. They write the, quote, possibility of former President Trump's return piles pressure on those fleeing life under Xi Jinping as Bolivia becomes the new jump-off point for a 7,000-mile trek.
Before its economic reforms were hailed as a miracle, before its once-closed doors opened to the wider world, and before its economic and quality of life metrics skyrocketed, China faced a severe housing crisis. On the brink of an incredible rise, China, particularly its urban areas, was unbearably overcrowded. For context, the average footprint of a one-bedroom apartment in Manhattan or the typical American kitchen was comparable to the average living space per person in urban China in 1980. It wasn't until 1985 that this figure surpassed 10 square meters, and it would take until the mid-1990s to reach 15 square meters. To put this density into perspective, these were the average living spaces in urban areas worldwide in 1992. Only cities like Tokyo, New Delhi, and Cairo had living spaces similar to those in urban China. However, space alone doesn't fully capture the extent of the housing crisis. Urban China, at the start of the world's largest rural-to-urban migration, was not only cramped but also dingy, dangerous, and far from modern. In 1985, 90% of urban households in China lacked piped gas, 70% didn't have exclusive access to toilets, and nearly 40% depended on shared kitchens and water taps. Rapid demographic changes were partly responsible for China's housing crisis, along with corruption and widespread poverty. However, the core issue was a lack of strong incentives to build new housing. Throughout the 1980s, housing in China was entirely under state control. Housing was provided in one of two ways, either through local government housing administrations or state-owned enterprises. Regardless of the source, housing was very affordable. Rent was considered a basic right and cost only 1 to 3% of the average income, with no connection to the costs of construction or maintenance. While this approach was ideologically consistent, it made building additional housing unattractive to central planners. Unlike investments in infrastructure or heavy industry, housing didn't generate substantial revenue. With the state both obligated and disinterested and private development outright illegal, China's housing situation deteriorated. Then Deng Xiaoping initiated a real estate revolution. The decades-long development boom in China began with a simple addition to Chapter 1, Article 10 of the Constitution of the People's Republic of China in 1988. The right to the use of land may be transferred according to law. This seemingly vague line, supported by smaller-scale pilot tests by the Communist Party, opened the floodgates for real estate development. Unlike in freehold countries like the US, all land in China, whether urban or rural, is owned by the state or collectives. This was true before the 1980s reforms and remains true today, but the reforms created opportunities for a range of intermediaries to emerge. The state still owned the land, but granted smaller local and municipal governments the right to use and develop it as they saw fit. In turn, these local governments, eager to increase their revenues for infrastructure projects or to sustain operations, could sell these land use rights to property developers. These developers would then build housing for a growing Chinese middle class that increasingly had the means to finance home purchases at full cost. Housing shifted from being a begrudging necessity funded by the state to a lucrative opportunity. Local governments now had a steady income stream from land sales, private developers had a booming demand to meet, and the increasingly affluent urban Chinese population had more housing options and investment opportunities. Suddenly, a private real estate and development sector, which hadn't existed just a few years prior, became a major force. Urban living spaces expanded rapidly, and home ownership soared. From 1998 to 2002, Chinese developers constructed enough housing to accommodate the entire population of the United States. This housing boom was not just a byproduct of the economic miracle, but a driving force behind it. According to the Sovereign Wealth Fund Institute, 6 of the world's top 10 largest real estate companies by total assets are based in either mainland China or Hong Kong, with most of their business conducted in mainland China. 4 of these leading land development companies were founded in the 1990s or later, making their rise from nothing to global giants in a construction-driven industry truly meteoric. This rapid ascent can partly be attributed to filling an extreme gap in supply, but it also involves strategic foresight and execution. Chinese real estate sales have dropped by a staggering $830 billion since 2021. Back then, the total value of real estate sold in China was around 17.5 trillion yuan, but by 2023, this figure had fallen to approximately 12 trillion yuan. This represents the largest decline in the past decade. In US dollars, this translates to an $830 billion decrease in sales, an amount greater than the GDP of Poland. Simultaneously, the value of the Chinese stock market has plummeted by about 60% since its peak in 2021. This situation bears a striking resemblance to the 2008 financial crisis in the United States, where the US stock market also saw a 60% drop, driven by a real estate crisis. The question now is whether we're witnessing a similar opportunity with Chinese stocks today, or if there is more trouble ahead for China. A key similarity between the current Chinese market and the US market after 2008 is how undervalued Chinese stocks have become. Now, if you like this video, check out this next video right here.